Welcome to the Nexus Project, a contemporary marketing conversation with Ghiorso.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Nexus Project. I'm your host, Ghiorso, and on today's episode, we have James Donner. James was one of the founding partners of Decoded, which merged into Media.Monks a few years ago and is now the EVP of Paid Media. We have a wide-ranging conversation. Of course, most of it focuses on the paid media side, but we get into a bunch of aspects of the domain. We talk about how AI is impacting it, both on the creative and media optimization side of things. We talk about measurement. We talk about e-commerce and its role, social media and its role in the broader ecosystem. James mentions half a dozen or more, really, I think, actionable, underrated opportunities today for marketers and a lot more within. So without further ado, here we go. James, welcome to the show.
Happy to be here.
Awesome. So let's dive right into it. When we did our intro call, I'm going to paraphrase a little bit, but you said something like advertising is just distribution. We were talking about kind of the analog and digital world and how things have changed. How do you think about that? Unpack it a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. So a couple distinctions there. So e-commerce advertising should be thought of in many cases as almost buying shelf space, or the same thing as buying distribution for your brand in a retail store. And so this is a concept that I think Byron Sharp is really pushing the most, but is getting picked up more in a lot of circles. But building off of the frameworks he laid out about 20 years ago in his book, How Brands Grow, which talked about mental and physical availability. So mental availability, a brand being easy to think of, and physical availability, a brand being easy to access, easy to buy. And these being the two ingredients for brand growth. So traditionally, physical availability is delivered by shelf space in retail stores or your own store. And now in the digital world, there's this concept of digital physical availability. So just the product, the brand being easy to access, easy to buy. Mental availability, easy to think of and coming to mind in purchasing moments, is something that advertising itself needs to drive. And I think part of the challenge and problem that's arisen in the last 10 years or so is that a lot of this e-commerce advertising that we're doing, such as search advertising, brand search, we're using advertising frameworks to assess something when maybe it's actually better off if we're using shelf space or distribution frameworks when we think about funding this, when we think about its role in the consumer journey, its role in driving growth for the business. And that's important because what you can't do is eliminate your actual advertising, the things that build that mental salience, in favor of these forms of shelf space. You end up with a product that no one knows about. They'll see it in a purchasing moment, like they might see it on a store shelf, but they'll never have heard of it prior to then. So I think that's a very helpful framework and concept for actually pushing forward, I think, the way we're thinking about e-commerce.
Yeah, I really like that. I know when we first spoke about it, it was, I would say, an unconventional way of describing this, but like immediately intuitively made sense to me. And I think the biggest difference, right, is if you're in the sort of analog world of retail, if you go out and get placement at Kroger and you're all of a sudden in 2,000 stores, you are by definition in front of a lot of people every day. Like whether they are purchasing your product or not, they're walking through that aisle and they're seeing your brand because there's only so many of X brand. There's only so much shelf space, where in an e-commerce environment, it's unlimited. And, if you're a coffee brand, you may be up against 20 other coffee brands or 10 on a physical shelf. If you're online, you're up against 5,000 coffee brands. So I think it's a super interesting way though to think about it. Like almost one of the benefits of kind of analog or physical retail is that the distribution in some ways, still national advertising and stuff obviously has a place, but in some ways it kind of rides along with the point of purchase. It's sort of packaged in together, where in an e-commerce environment, yeah, that's like totally disintermediated. So, it's like a tree falls.
Yeah, it's a different
thing.
Yeah, it's a different mechanism in e-commerce, but I think where it matters too is how should organizations look at funding their advertising budgets. And perhaps it shouldn't be about brand search versus, an online video buy or a CTV buy, but rather, how much should we fund brand search as part of our essentially product distribution strategy? And then looking at it, like we'll refer to it as a rent. You're paying rent now. It's just an ongoing tax, or people have said the Google tax in the past.
Yeah.
And so it's this different sort of fixed cost of selling versus advertising, which is really, should be thought of as a growth engine. So yeah, I think it's a very interesting concept. And I think it's the right one for how advertisers think about what they're doing and the role of these various digital channels and digital tactics.
Yeah, that's interesting. I know kind of a related topic to this, as you measure ultimately the efficacy of advertising, is the overall measurement conversation, and then specifically like the timelines that are being used. Let's dive into that a little bit. Long-term measurement versus short-term media mix modeling. Where does that play today? What's your take? And then maybe we'll dive a little deeper into it.
Yeah, I think the mental versus physical availability thing is a helpful framework to apply to measurement as well. So if you increase your distribution in retail stores, you will see an uptick in sales immediately the next day, right? As soon as those products are on the shelf. So the same is true when you increase your brand search presence, your brand shopping presence, when you increase your presence in these retail media networks, you're going to see that lift right away. And people now will expect that same amount of immediate impact from traditional advertising and reach-based advertising, or things that build that brand awareness salience. And everyone knows brand awareness works over a period of time, but I think there's this increased belief that advertising could and should work over very short time periods, because a lot of these e-commerce conversion tactics do. And that results in systemically across many marketers a defunding of the long-term investments because they're hard to measure, hard to prove. And so you do need to measure different advertising tactics over different time periods. An advertising tactic that is intended to build that mental availability will work over years. So there's this awesome study also by Ehrenberg Bass Institute. So that's what Byron Sharp heads up. If anyone hasn't studied all their work and isn't reading it and following it, definitely should. They're putting out all the best work about how advertising works in the industry. But their study looked at what happens when brands stop advertising. And it found that after 5 years, on average, sales had fallen about 56%. But then in the first year, they'd only fallen about 14%. And maybe getting these numbers slightly off. And so what it showed was that the amount of sales loss in year one was so small compared to the total sales loss over 5 years, which just kind of proves that advertising wasn't just driving impact on a 7-day basis or 30-day basis or even a 1-year basis. It's driving a 5-year-long impact. And if you only measure, even if you're running match market lift studies, you're running conversion lift studies, any of these gold standard measurement methods, if you only measure for 3 months, you're still only capturing a fraction of the value that advertising is driving. And so I think all of this is leading to systemic underinvestment in certain types of brand building, reach building activities.
Yeah. Okay. So that's maybe you just answered the question I was about to ask, but it seems like your opinion here is that basically the industry shifted too much to performance. Like I don't want to say things are being measured too much, but there's maybe too much of a focus on, if you can't directly attribute an ROI, then like the media doesn't have value or the reach doesn't have value. Do you think it's the industry that kind of pivoted too much? Because it used to be the opposite, where back in the day it was just throwing stuff against a wall, and the old trope about 50% of your advertising works. You don't know which 50%. But like, do you think it's gone too much in the other direction?
I would say, if you had to say one thing or one rule of thumb, I would say largely yes. However, I think what matters is that the mental availability and physical availability of a brand are in harmony. If you have only one, you want distribution. You want physical availability. You want the product to be available to buy. And there's tons and tons and tons of brands that are extremely well known that spend very, very little on advertising because they're in every grocery store, they're in every Walmart. So at a base level, you need distribution. So that is still super critical. However, a lot of these CPG brands are most successful when they also pair that with marketing and advertising that builds awareness. And so I believe that every brand needs these two things in harmony. They need to be assessing what levers of their business are driving that distribution, physical availability, and what levers are driving that mental availability and brand awareness type of metrics, and make sure that they're maximizing both of those. And so you can't sit there and think because you're investing in e-commerce, in Facebook conversion ads, in Google conversion ads, they are actually building up long-term equity in the brand, that you're reaching new customers. Most of the time, you're not necessarily reaching new customers. You're reaching people who are at the point of purchase, who may already have high intent for your brand. So I would say, yes, many people are underinvesting in that. I also think where brands get into trouble is that the D2Cs, they have no distribution. And so when were they able to really take off? They were able to really take off when Facebook started having conversion bidding in about 2013, and when Google continued to improve their conversion products. At that point, Google and Facebook became these really, really efficient digital retail stores and digital shelf space. And now anyone can buy shelf space, and they're putting it in front of the exact right customer who's already in store looking at mattresses, and now they're serving you a mattress. And Facebook is great because they can kind of do both with some of their ads. They can, build that long-term, brand equities, and they can also function as shelf space. And that's one of the powers of the platform. What happens with these D2Cs, though, that's a huge risk, is they say we need to be like the big, we want to be like P&G, so we have to do brand advertising. But they don't realize P&G's brand advertising works so well because there is so much distribution already there. Almost a bigger sin than overinvesting in what I would call physical availability or digital shelf space, brand search things. Worse than that is actually investing in the brand side of advertising without the distribution being there. So a D2C who starts doing these big brand buys, but they don't actually have enough lower funnel media or distribution in retail or offline to actually take advantage of those brand buys. And that's where you end up also wasting a lot of money.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense because, in the past kind of analog world, if someone saw a billboard 17 times, they weren't going to go seek out that product. They just had to have that resonate enough mentally where the next week they were in the grocery store, they'd go, oh yeah, and consciously or even subconsciously just choose to buy that brand. But now, potentially, to your point, like, you can't just assume that plays out. If you don't have the other side on the distribution, then you might have that.
Your billboard ads aren't effective.
Yeah,
your ROI is very negative. And all of these ad marketplaces are very competitive marketplaces. And so there's an equilibrium everyone's moving towards where their ROI is barely positive, right? And the advertisers who can cut a profit buying ads there will do it. And the ones who can't, don't. But if you lose any little bit of efficiency in your advertising, kind of setup and ecosystem, I think you quickly go from being profitable to unprofitable. And so having that even a little bit of imbalance can be a hugely negative thing.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So it's still like, basically, you still need to be kind of everywhere in the funnel. It's a different world than it was even 5 or 10 years ago. That being said, we live in this world now of 50 different platforms that you probably need to be looking at, if not actively playing in. Some of them are connected, some are not. How should brands fundamentally be approaching the measurement conversation? They're like, yes, we get it, we agree, upper funnel, lower funnel, performance, all that stuff kind of needs to be part of it in a sophisticated, nuanced, contextual way. But like, at the end of the day, how do they actually determine the strategy is working or not?
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, there is no silver bullet. I think most important is that, there's a number of pitfalls brands will commonly make. If you're an omni-channel business and you drive sales in retail stores, you should not look at e-com as this perfect proxy for how to lift your entire business. If you are using your D2C sales or even your Amazon.com sales as indicators of what channels to fund, as indicators of what audiences to go after, you will end up growing your e-com business. You will not be nearly as effective growing your offline brick and mortar business as you could be. So I think it's super critical that your measurement is aligned to your distribution and where your sales are coming from, and that you're capturing all of your sales in your measurement, which usually means econometric modeling or match market lift studies. Match market lift studies have their own challenges, as mentioned before, about they're still too short term. Even a 3-month-long match market lift study, an experiment, it's good for evaluating 2 different things, an A/B test of different advertising strategies. It is not a perfect capture of the value of that tactic because, as that Ehrenberg-Bass study showed, that marketing tactic is often driving impact over years, not 3 months.
Yeah.
So we're seeing a big swing back towards econometric modeling.
Interesting.
Where people are leaning into it, which has its own flaws. So for most brands, they're running a stack that has some MMM in it, if they can afford it. Attribution is a signal. Match market studies are in there. And most businesses are debating how and where they use these 3 things and how they deploy them and decision off them.
Yeah, okay. Still sounds like a lot needs to kind of shake out there. Let's talk about, I think, probably the topic in our industry right now, which is AI, and it's a big one. We've had quite a few conversations about this, but, what's your overall take on how AI is going to impact the paid media environment over the next couple of years? Maybe how it is impacting it today, but really I think all this stuff is going to continue to accelerate over the next year or two. What's your kind of worldview on that?
In the advertising world, I think media is in an evolution and creative is in a revolution. Media, platforms like Meta, Google have been automating more and more. Their machine learning algorithms that power their bidding have been getting better and better and better to the point where, in the Google ecosystem, they don't let you put in targeting in certain places because they know they're going to do a better job at it than you. A lot of them now are doing things where you can put in targeting, but then you can say, let the algorithm go beyond my targeting to reach whoever they want. That's often the best because you're kind of using your human general knowledge to key in the AI because you can't big data your way through everything. There's actually, if you only have 100 conversions for your business a day or, through paid, a machine learning algorithm can't figure out everything in the universe from that. So you can key them in where to focus and then they expand. So those products are getting better and better and better. And a lot more of the media buyer's job is becoming almost AI consulting on how to leverage these products and maximize them. And the new targeting is the pixel and the signals you feed into that algorithm. So in media, that will continue. And it's going to be about what data are we feeding into those pixels and those algorithms, and how do we improve that data? How do we push lifetime value into there? How do we tailor it based on the customer who's coming through? And all of these other almost pixel optimization techniques. On the creative side, I think it's where it's exciting, where it's a revolution. So I think unit economics are changing and the cost per asset will fall. If the cost per asset falls, you're still going to make more assets because you can make more money as a marketer and a business and a brand by continuing to improve your creative quality. Yes, you could take the savings. If you lower the cost per asset, you could still produce your 10 assets a month or a quarter and take that money back and save it. You're probably better off producing 50 assets and then testing them all and making even better creative. So the cost per asset will fall, which will mean that you can run even greater creative flywheels of test and learn and iterate and optimize. And so I think that will become the name of the game. I think there's this very interesting, I guess it's a little bit of the media's version or advertising's version of the paperclip problem, right? So the idea that if you tell an AI to maximize production of paper clips, it'll destroy the world.
Yeah.
And we're going to be telling these creative AIs to maximize the performance of our creative, but, against what signal? And most of the signals are these real-time e-commerce signals. And so are we going to end up with all creative that's cats with lasers shooting out their eyes and massive discount codes plastered all over the ads? And it's very possible.
Yeah, I think that's a fascinating idea. And I think, leading up to that, I totally agree. What we're basically talking about is we're getting to the point now where true hyper-personalization is going to be it. Like you may see a different ad than I see on an almost individual level, like the actual creative, because it will be able to change so quickly and so efficiently and so cheaply. There'll just be almost unlimited versions of creative. But I agree, you then get into this thing where it's like, okay, but what are you optimizing for? The obvious thing is the lower funnel you can get with the KPI. That's going to be the most obvious. Is it a click? Is it a sale? Is it a whatever? Or maybe just directly a click. But the things that you may be optimizing for in a higher funnel campaign, I think are fundamentally harder to measure. They're absolutely harder to measure in real time to optimize, that type of bidding. You do get into this bizarre idiocracy style, kind of, optimized to the lowest common denominator to get a click. If you look at the way some of the social media algorithms have gone off the rails, what are the things that get the most click through? Well, oftentimes it's anger, rage, these kind of not so nice human emotions, certainly not human emotions you want tied to a brand. So what do we do with that?
No, I mean, there's so many forces working against the traditional way advertising drives impact because everything these days is, we're also attracted to the idea of real-time data and just everything being hyper data driven. And the AIs need that. They need data at scale passing through them. And so I think the holy grail is if you could build a brand engine that would recursively optimize creative for brand outcomes. Is that even possible given how difficult it is to create a data feed of good brand outcome, bad brand outcome? Because a lot of that is, based on neuroscience. And I'm sure these companies that attach helmets to people and measure their brain waves will eventually be producing some of this. But my favorite example of how brand advertising works is in this book, Decoded. Not related to our old agency, but it's Decoded, The Science of Advertising, I believe is the title. He goes into the example of Corona beer and tying it back to Daniel Kahneman's work around System 1 and System 2 thinking. The idea of fast twitch, intuitive thinking, almost subconscious driven by mental associations versus our more explicit, considered thinking. And the idea that most human decisions are not these explicit, considered decisions, that they are these fast twitch, intuitive, mental association driven things. And so we train on this here at our agency, which is the idea of, Corona, right? When people think of Corona, what's the first thing that comes to mind?
Yeah,
the beach, right? Yeah. And when you think of the beach, what emotions come to mind?
Yeah, it's you're relaxed and, happy and hanging out.
Right. So exactly. So Corona has, assured their position in culture, in people's wallets and their fridges, just by burying their brand in your brain so close to the beach and happiness and relaxation. There's a saying that neurons that fire together wire together. So they show you the beer, they show you the beach, happiness fires, Corona fires. Now you're in store, you see Corona. It's like Pavlovian reaction. Your brain subconsciously, your system one thinking fires happiness, and you're just that much more likely now to choose Corona out of all those beers. And so the question is, will these new creative AI systems be able to land on that concept of our Corona brand should be really associated with the beach? Not today. I don't think today. I think some people are probably going after that. Eventually, maybe, but we'll still need the humans for that, type of strategy. And that strategy will still drive massive impact. No amount of e-commerce ads are going to do anything compared to what associating Corona with the beach will do.
Yeah, it's fascinating to think through the lens of AI, which is incredibly kind of intelligent in its own way, but it does not have human intelligence. It does not have human emotion. It doesn't have any ability to kind of intuit those things that you're describing. It can optimize and test around, if we show this thing, this other thing happens. It's very, very good at, and now we've seen with generative AI, it's very good at producing a lot of what would be inputs, i.e. creative, to then test more of those signals with more options effectively. And so I do think, like, in a lower funnel context, we're going to get to a point where a lot of this stuff is, I still think there'll be humans in the loop, but it's going to move so much faster with so many more experiments and just so much more, like orders of magnitude more testing and versions and all of that. I do think there's this idea, though, that the demand for the assets will be elastic, basically. For a given client, if they can have 100 times more assets for the same price versus, to your point, like 100th of the cost, I think they're going to choose the former because there's so much more than you can do with those assets. I think that's why some of the AI doomerism stuff, I don't totally buy, because I think we're all just going to be, like, as agencies or practitioners, dramatically more efficient than we used to be. But it's like, if everyone has AI, then no one has AI, because all the brands now are going to have 100 or 1,000x more assets than they used to, and there's no magic AI button to hit to make that happen. At least I don't think there is in the near term. But
I agree. I think the forces will still push folks back into optimizing their overall advertising investment across working, non-working media. And a lot of times it still makes sense to shift money into non-working media because optimizing creative can make it so much more effective. And so you lose 2% more of your working media budget, but you gain significant investment into your creative production. You can easily make back that 2%. And as you said, they'll be competing with other brands who are optimizing it. Now, the question again is, will the optimization actually be the optimization to the right outcome? Will it be optimization to the right brand outcomes that drive that mental awareness to get people to choose you when you're in store, when they're looking at a wall of beers and they choose your brand? Or will it just help them click on your ad because they notice it and drive to Amazon.com to make a purchase? And you have a really good ad at catching people's attention. And that's a lot of what I think really effective e-commerce advertising is at this point. For the lower funnel stuff, the stuff that's closer to physical availability, it's like having a really good product on the shelf, right? You're buying the shelf space with the ad unit. The creative is almost like the product packaging. It needs to catch their eye. It needs to make them want to buy it because it feels good, looks good, seems to meet their needs, etc.
Yeah. I think the former example is something that's going to take me a while to wrap my head around, but that's a fascinating conversation, though. How do you optimize around those, like, historically purely human-driven, creative-driven decisions? How do you use AI to improve those? I don't know, question for someone smarter than me.
One of the interesting things too that makes it a challenge is the way advertising influences us isn't so immediate and direct. There is, there's the mere exposure effect, where the more you're exposed to something, the more you are predisposed to liking it or being favorable to it. And also, the more you're exposed to something, the greater your processing fluency is of it. So the greater you uptake it and ingest the message. So there's an element where the Corona Beach effectiveness, campaign idea, it doesn't work when someone sees it once or even 3 times. But after the 5th and 6th time and 7th and 10th and 50th, it's getting much deeper into our psyche. And the AI testing model that optimizes for that needs to be able to simulate all of that. They need to be able to simulate the repeated exposures over time to measure our literal brain waves as we respond to that. And so someone will set that system up one day, and that will then be the AI, creative optimization system for brand outcomes, I believe.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically like having a group of people behind a one-way mirror react to something, but the difference is maybe show them hundreds of versions or thousands of versions and then just measure their brainwaves directly. Although we're getting like way out into science fiction land. So,
some people are doing that. Yeah.
Are they? I mean, maybe not. Maybe it's closer than I'm realizing.
There are companies today that will show you creatives and track your brain's, stimulation based on it.
Yeah. Okay. That's wild.
It's just not cheap. Will it ever be cost effective to do that across enough people to actually power a sort of algorithm? I don't think it's probably anywhere close to that at this point.
Yeah, I did read a news article the other day that there's a company that's using like fMRIs, and then they're training an AI to try to interpret the signals of the fMRI. And they're humans saying what they're thinking of, so they can train it that way. And they're now up to like 70%, because it's effectively then using generative AI to reproduce the image. And they're actually now to the point where they like have a pretty effective ability to have someone picture a thing mentally in their head, and then the AI like shows them what they're picturing. So,
I'm very excited on my next vacation in 5 years to talk to a dolphin when they finally release this technology.
It's just going to take fish a bunch of times in a row. But
yeah,
totally. Okay, one more kind of big topic here, social media and kind of its impact on this whole conversation. Social media takes, I think, more attention than it ever has. How do you see that impacting kind of the overall paid media landscape? Do you think it's like underrated, overrated, and then I guess we'll go from there.
I think it's properly rated. It's where consumers are spending all their time, right?
Yeah.
In the digital ecosystems, so much time is spent in social. In particular, one social channel, which I would call YouTube a social channel at this point, is probably the most underrated, underinvested versus their time spent, just based on a time spent basis. Because there are so many people there spending so much time. And for many advertisers, it is not as scaled as a Meta or even now TikTok, which is growing so fast.
Yeah, interesting. So you think it's underrated from a paid standpoint, just investment versus sheer volume of attention? Or, I mean, do you see it in terms of how targeted it can be? Are there other kind of nuances there that you see being underappreciated, or is it just sheer like volume that advertisers just need?
I think from a sheer attention and time spent there versus investment, yes, that's the primary factor where that's out of balance. Now, I think there's two reasons it's out of balance potentially. One is that it's not marketed the right way and brands aren't seeing it the right way. And the other one is that the ROI isn't quite where it should be. And this has been an interesting thing for me. I mean, when we put it through these tests on performance campaigns, it does generally pretty well on brand. It's often not showing up quite as well as some of the other social channels like a Meta, despite the fact that Google has had conversion algorithms, for much longer than Meta has, and has been building those to optimize. So I don't know if some of these, newer social platforms have uncovered a more effective algorithm in that sense. And obviously search is just so high intent based, it can still be really effective. Or, you can have consumer behavior, and it's a little bit of chicken and egg, but like consumers are very used to now buying through Instagram ads. And so that increases the uptake on Instagram ads, which increases, it's a positive flywheel.
Yeah. Do you think it's more about the inherent behavior? Like when you're on like a traditional social media platform, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, you're sort of doing this jumping around frenetic thing. Your attention's bouncing all over the place. But when you're on YouTube, you may be watching more, like paying attention singularly, watching more long form content. I mean, YouTube Shorts is different, but maybe you're watching a 30-minute video on, I don't know, whatever. Do you think that in and of itself changes the way then people kind of interact or don't with ads they're served?
I think yes, it's definitely a factor. It's probably a material factor. At the same time, there's a lot of, similar content on these platforms, especially when you get into shorts.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the Meta example is somewhat self-fulfilling. I think the algorithm was so good at finding who to target and also rewarding effective creatives. And the ads are a lot more clickable too on Meta, right? Like the whole thing's usually
Like just
clickable,
the
so you'll see higher
UI
click
itself.
rates.
Like just like literally the way the UI is structured.
Yeah, I mean the video ads, like, they still have that nice big clickable area underneath them. So that can create better data feedback loops in some senses. But I think years of good product advertising on Meta has created that consumer behavior. Most of us like our Instagram ads, I think.
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah, I feel
it's
that
like browsing some cool store.
Yeah.
And now I just, much more willing to purchase. I think that YouTube can and should get there. It has the time, it has the algorithms, it has the people. It's a little bit of a mystery for me. I do not have the answer, but I absolutely think that is the most criminally underinvested area in digital advertising.
Yeah. Okay. That's awesome. Okay, let's go over to the rapid fire round here. It's not that rapid, but okay. First question here. In a business context, what do you believe deeply that most people disagree with you on?
Oh my gosh, business
this
context.
Is like where are you a contrarian, kind of in the professional world?
Probably a lot of the stuff that we've been talking about, which is that performance advertising doesn't do nearly as much as we think it does. Or it does, right? I mean, it does what it does. And what it does is, in many cases, closer to shelf space than true advertising. And on the other side, it's that, a D2C can just shift into big brand advertising. That's not the path to growth. Usually the path to growth is getting into retail, and then you can unlock the big brand advertising after you have that retail distribution.
Yeah, they're skipping a step there. Yeah, that's really interesting.
The other one where I'm contrarian is the idea that media should be measured over 7-day, 28-day windows. I think it is the worst way. You need different decisioning frameworks for different decisions. For deciding on how to invest in your channels, you need a measurement system that will look at years of impact of that channel. And when you're looking to optimize creatives, use your last touch, analytics to optimize the creative, but not, you need to match the measurement source and the signal to the type of decision that you're trying to make or inform.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so 5 years from now, what emerging platform will leaders regret not paying more attention to now? So this is the, what is TikTok 2018? What is Amazon 2012 today? What is the thing, if you're playing the stock market, that 5 years from now, the platform that people are going to go, oh man, I wish I had the kind of first mover advantage there.
That's a hard one for me to answer.
This is the not yet year one, what's the up and coming?
Yeah. I mean, I think less a platform. I think people will regret not building communities around their brands and products. I think that any brand that's able to build a community, and by community, I mean like a literal space, a space that has utility to people that then attracts everyone who's basically your customer base and in that niche. So I think of the Nike sneaker app. I think of Instant Pot, which has the largest Facebook group of any business in the world. They have like 10 million people who go to their Facebook page and get recipes and all talk and discuss, and it's owned by Instant Pot.
Yeah,
so, I mean, they're locked in with those consumers. No other brand is edging in there. Sephora has their forums that everyone goes to. So I think you create a community and a space for people where they then start interacting and your product is just lightly affiliated there.
Yeah.
I think you're golden. That's tens of millions of dollars, if not more, in media value.
Yeah, that's a great answer. That's awesome. Okay, so kind of similar question here, but like, what's the most underrated opportunity in marketing today? You've mentioned several of them already. So any others that come to mind?
Yeah, no, I mean, community building or things like YouTube, or even just the power of distribution. I think that's the biggest thing I'd say. If you can increase your distribution, your advertising ROIs will go up. Because it's essentially like increasing your conversion ads. Every dollar you spend will now have more points where it can pay off. So that's one, YouTube as well. And then building community, and again, like even some brands that, I feel passionate about should host influencer conferences. They should get everyone in the niche who is a passionate consumer of, let's say, their beauty products and bring them all together, because influencers are driving so much of sales. And so think about not just paying those influencers, but actually, creating a place where they get value and they want to be just even interacting with your business at all because you've created some sort of app or some sort of event or something that provides value to them.
Yeah, this is probably a controversial thing to say, but whenever I see a consumer product brand who has a little bit of like a culty vibe, like not full on, like weird robes and, living in the same house, but like a little bit of that vibe where there's like some extra kind of thing with their core customers, it's like, that's the brand that I'm like, they're going to have staying power. And it's very hard to do. It's very hard.
Yeah. You can't necessarily bank on that, but it is great when you have it. But you can create it. I mean, everyone will talk in performance space about like providing value back to the consumer, not just in the, and that obviously is the key. And actually, I'll throw one more bonus one out there because I'm passionate about this. We usually talk about it. People don't realize that if you're a digital or any sort of advertising buyer, people are not looking at the ads. Like systemically, they're not looking at the ads, but you can actually take advantage of that. They're not looking at certain ads at a much higher rate. Only 10% of people are looking at display ads. 90% of people are looking at your YouTube ads. And there are companies out there that will measure attention and tie it back to media outcomes and let you understand which placements are being looked at and not looked at. And this has been around now for 3 years, and people still aren't uptaking it the way they should. I mean, you're telling brands that you can cut unseen impressions that they're buying, but no one's looking at, and you can replace them with impressions that people are looking at, and there's still a hesitance to pay additional fees for attention measurement, et cetera.
And when you say looking at, you mean literally their eyeballs are directed or not directed at that real estate.
Exactly. This is a new version of viewability. So it's viewability 3.0 or whatever. Viewability is the opportunity to be seen because it's loaded. Attention is actually looked at and is seen. And you're not measuring this in every single impression. What you're measuring is benchmarks for placements. And then you're pricing those placements accordingly. And the smart advertisers can arbitrage on this now. I can buy stuff that's really...
I mean, is that the underlying technology? They're actually doing eye tracking with a certain amount of people where it's statistically relevant, and then using those kind of tied to them.
They have a panel of a few thousand people. They're seeing when they're on times.com, how much they're looking at the top banner, how much they're looking at the side banner. And this is going to become the universal currency for the value of an impression. I mean, these are just real impressions. We talk about measuring impressions. A real impression is an ad that someone looked at. So we all need to immediately, everyone, this is my call, everyone in the industry needs to absolutely adopt attention measurement, because it's just like fundamental. It is the way that we should be looking at buying at least impressions and buying reach.
Well, and your point about arbitrage, I mean, there's pretty simple math then that you could do, right? And go like, well, if this ad unit costs, double what this other one does, but the attention is actually 3x, well, then that's a no-brainer. Like,
that's the exact case between YouTube and banners. A YouTube CPM is probably twice what a banner CPM is, but its eyes on screen attention is anywhere from 3 to 10x higher. So more than makes up for that. Plus, not only looking at it at a higher rate, you can also measure duration. They're looking at it for 3 times longer. For us, the benchmark is YouTube has a 25x more efficient cost per second of attention than a banner ad does. Another reason, and YouTube does very, very well versus all these other digital platforms. Another reason why that platform is very underappreciated and underinvested.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm glad you threw that in at the end. James, this was great. Thanks for being on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Nexus Project. If we referenced anything in terms of links, etc., they should be in the show notes. Make sure to subscribe so you get all the episodes in your feed. And if you wouldn't mind leaving us a rating or review, that would be super helpful. Last but not least, share this with a friend or a colleague that you think might get value out of it. And I will see you on the next episode.